It's an important policy document for the states, and that's why it goes through the exacting process that it does, involving public consultation, independent examination, and also ultimately approval by the States Assembly, which is a different route than many other policy documents that are produced by government. So it does have that significance and that importance, and it clearly influences islanders' lives directly.
Last month, the states approved what is arguably the most important piece of work to come out of this 4-year political term. It was certainly the longest, coming after 2 weeks of intense debate, which included arguing over scores of amendments covering everything from disability and quarrying to marine parks and that thorniest of issue, housing. The Bridging Island Plan, as amended, will now determine planning policy for the next 3 years, but also set an important precedent for future plans after that. With it being such a wide-ranging and weighty document, we might forgive ourselves for not having had the time to fully grasp its scope and implications. With this in mind, we invited one of its authors, Policy Officer Kevin Pilley, to help us unpick what was actually decided last month and how it might impact our everyday lives. Kevin, the Island Plan finished. The debate finished a couple of weeks ago after 60 hours of debate over 10 days. Does that mean from a policy perspective it's time to relax, put your feet up?
Unfortunately not. The system we have in Jersey is such that as soon as the States Assembly approve the Island Plan, that becomes the Island Planning document, and it's the document against which planning decisions are made in the island. And so we've been very busy in the last couple of weeks working to incorporate all of the amendments that the Assembly have made into the plan, so that we can produce a consolidated, revised version of the document. So that includes change to the policies, the preambles that support the policies, and also to the proposals map.
I know probably later on we'll talk about what happens next, but this was a bridging island plan. It was shortened to 3 years. When does the work start on the next one, which will be, from 2026, is that right? And 25, start 26. So, essentially there is perhaps a habit of looking at the Island Plan as a product, whereas really it's a process, and it's about making a plan, then monitoring that plan, reviewing it, and then looking to produce a new plan. So it's a continual process. And so work to look at the next Island Plan review will start very soon. Clearly we have some key bits of information which will be made available shortly. So the results of the census will be out very shortly, and that will then help to inform the groundwork for the subsequent review of the plan that's just been adopted. As you say, this is a bridging island plan, so it's over a shorter plan period than would normally be the case. But we continually monitor and review the performance of the plan. We hear a lot about Jersey having a plan-led system, which is distinct from perhaps other systems in Europe and in the UK. Just explain a little bit, what does that mean, a plan-led system, and why does it make it special?
What it means is it gives the Island Plan a certain degree of primacy in the planning system. So, as I said earlier, all planning decisions that are made in relation to planning applications are judged against the Island Plan. So the Island Plan is a critical policy tool for determining planning applications, and it's also a tool that can be used to set out what the community's needs are over the plan period. So it's an important policy document for the states, and that's why it goes through the exacting process that it does, involving public consultation, independent examination, and also ultimately approval by the States Assembly, which is a different route than many other policy documents that are produced by government. So it does have that significance and that importance, and it clearly influences islanders' lives directly in terms of the decisions that are made, either in relation to their own proposals and aspirations, perhaps for their properties, their businesses, or indeed the environment that we all enjoy on the island. So it does have a great deal of significance for Jersey, and I think it's right that we do have a plan-led system in the island, and the island plan provides that framework.
You mentioned the census, which is due out imminently. How accurate can the Bridging Island Plan be? How reliable can it be, in the sense that it was passed without the assumptions and the knowledge of the census, and there are other things as well. For instance, we don't have a clear population policy, and to a lesser extent, I know the Minister mentioned this a number of times during the debate, we didn't have a schools to state strategy ready. How confident can we be that the assumptions on which the Bridging Island Plan was based are accurate?
Well, they are assumptions, and they are always assumptions. Essentially, we're looking to make a plan over a period of time, and things will inevitably change over that period of time. So, in a sense, the production of an island plan is always based on a snapshot of our understanding of the situation at a particular moment in time, and how that might change in the future. Clearly, there were some particular circumstances that led us to produce a Bridging Island Plan this time. So normally a plan period would be over a 10-year period. This time it's over a much shorter period than that, over a 3-year period. And that's essentially because of the circumstances that the island found itself in relative to the pandemic and also to Brexit. So there was there were some real challenges there about what the future of the island held, and ministers considered that issue and thought it appropriate that rather than pursue the original proposal, which was to re-establish a new 10-year plan for the island, that we undertake still a comprehensive island plan review, but we do it for a shorter period of time so that we can take stock of what's going to happen over that shorter time period, and then reset the next island plan over a longer term.
If next month, for example, the census revealed that the population was way out of the BIP predictions, is it amendable? Is it adaptable, or would it be a case of adjusting the next island plan?
Essentially, the island plan review process would need to be invoked if you wanted to change the island plan. But clearly, the assumptions that the Bridging Island Plan were based on have been informed by work of colleagues in Statistics Jersey, and based on all of the best available information that we have. And so in that sense, I'm sure that the assumptions that we've got in the plan are as robust as they might be. We've made provision for that over the plan period and sought to ensure that we're planning for the assumed level of change over that shorter plan period. You raised the issue about things like the Education Estate Review, for example, and clearly it's important that we have regard to the island's needs over the plan period, and we try and work across government to ensure that where government have particular needs or proposals, that we try and incorporate those into the plan where we can. But as I say, the island plan process is a continual one, and the plan itself is a snapshot in time. And it's never perfect in the sense that you don't start with a clean sheet of paper. Everything is moving at a different pace and to a different timescale. So we have regard to what we can, and we try and ensure that the plan can accommodate things that may arise during the plan period.
And what do you say to the charge, which I have heard that the island plan is doomed to fail because it only tackles the supply side of things without, in the absence of a population policy, actually tackling demand?
Well, in terms of demand, work was done, particularly in relation to housing, to look at the demand for housing. We did something called the Objective Assessment of Housing Need as part of the preparation of the evidence base for the plan. And that looks to analyse what Jersey's housing requirements are over the plan period. And the plan makes provision for all different types of housing. So it makes provision for more affordable homes, it makes provision for open market homes, and it also has regard to things like the size and types of homes that people need. So the plan tries to ensure that we have a better understanding of what the island's requirements are, and then tries to make provision for that. And that's not just about housing; it's about all facets of island life. So, economic requirements, social requirements, and community requirements, as well as the environmental aspect of the plan.
Now, during the debate, we had more than 100 amendments lodged by members, smashing the record for the most amendments ever for a state's debate. And the Environment Minister didn't get his own way. There were certain amendments from backbenchers and others that were successful. I'm thinking perhaps there was an amendment around the definition of tall buildings, or the phrasing when tall buildings will be considered. Le Gigolong quarry was not safeguarded. And we also had a policy change on splitting and redeveloping outbuildings outside of built-up areas. Were there some amendments that perhaps you thought are unworkable?
Well, clearly, all of the amendments have to be workable relative to the planning system, and we worked with members to help them frame their aspirations so that they. Were they accepted by the Assembly? They sat comfortably in the plan and were viable from a planning point of view. And clearly we had a number of rich debates in the Assembly about the challenges and issues that the island faces. And there are no right answers in that sense. And members will have different views about how the island should respond to the challenges that it's got. And clearly on issues like housing, for example, how we meet our housing need, there was clearly strong views expressed about the planning response that we should make to that, whether we should release more green fields, whether we should have more dense forms of development, whether we should have taller buildings. And these are all real challenges that the island faces. And the Assembly had some good debates about the options that the island could pursue, and ultimately what direction the island plan should take the development of the island in. So I think it was interesting that members identified some of those key challenges and some of those key tensions, and sought to resolve those through the amendments that they adopted.
Let's have a quick whistle-stop tour of some of the headlines of what was decided. Housing clearly gets probably the most prominence out of all the issues in the Bridging Island Plan. Could you just give me a recap on how many houses were agreed, and how many were affordable, and how many will be going on greenfield?
Yeah, I mean, housing's always a topic of a lot of interest in relation to the island plan. The plan set an overall requirement for homes, and we look to provide up to 4,300 homes over the plan period. I think the important thing to remember in relation to that, though, is most of those homes are planned to be provided from the island's existing built-up areas. And whilst there was a lot of debate about fields, that was only a small proportion of the overall level of housing that the plan was seeking to make provision for, and specifically to make provision for affordable homes. And so, within the context of that overall requirement of up to 4,300 homes, most of those homes will be coming from the built-up area. There will be about 1,600 of those will be affordable homes. The remainder will be open market homes. And then of those affordable homes, I think it's just over 400 of those are coming on greenfield sites. The remainder are being provided within the built-up area and delivered on state-owned sites or sites acquired by Andium Homes, for example. So I think, as I say, whilst a lot of focus was on the use of fields, that was just a small proportion of the overall level of housing supply that the plan was seeking to make.
I think it's natural that people do focus on greenfields and houses, but are there other parts of the plan which perhaps may not have got the same level of media and public focus that you feel were equally or even more significant, perhaps dealing with the environment, dealing with the heritage environment, and other fields that, as I say, may not have got the same level of attention? Sure.
Well, clearly the island plan is very broad in its scope and is touches on most aspects of island life in that it helps to shape the environment that we all live in, so that there are key policies in the plan related to the protection of the environment, and the minister was keen to ensure that we came forward with a plan that provided appropriate levels of protection for Jersey's special landscapes and seascapes. So this plan dips its toe in the water, if you like, in terms of setting out a more rigorous policy regime for the marine environment than previous island plans have done. So that's one significant step forward. Responding to things like climate change, this plan has had specific regard to things like flood risk and the island's response to both rising sea levels and increasing inland flood risk, and also responding to through the planning system in terms of what the island plan can do to respond to helping to deliver more efficient forms of development, more energy efficient buildings. So the plan has tried to respond to those new issues and new challenges that the island faces, and there are some elements in there that are stronger than previous island plans, and that would also include things like responding to challenges around biodiversity. So some of the policy regimes have been enhanced in this plan to address those particular issues.
It's a good point to talk about. I think it's in a couple of weeks' time that the States Assembly will debate the carbon neutral roadmap. Is this an example of compatibility between the Bridging Island Plan and that particular document?
Sure. We try to work in cross-government to ensure that the Island Plan can help deliver the objectives of other parts of government and that the island needs to respond to. And from a planning point of view, the plan can make a clear response to the challenge of climate change. So one of the key tenets of the Island Plan is around where we put development, and that influences how often and how people travel, which of course has got climate implications in terms of if people have greater choice of walking, cycling or catching the bus, then they won't need to use the car as much. If their homes and their places of work are and schools are better located to one another. So the plan can have a significant influence on levels of greenhouse gas emissions from just by influencing travel patterns. Clearly the plan can respond to things like increasing temperature by encouraging more planting, protecting existing trees and green infrastructure. It can respond to rising sea levels by having a planning policy framework that helps to deal with both coastal and inland flood risk. And as I mentioned, there's policies in the plan now that seek to require new developments to be more energy efficient and to reduce their carbon footprint. We also incorporate policy in the plan to try and encourage the reuse of existing buildings. Obviously, existing buildings have embodied carbon within them, and we've got a policy test now in the plan that requires applicants to demonstrate that an existing building is not appropriate to refurbish or repair. So there's a real thrust on how the planning system can help deliver those climate objectives.
Moving topic slightly, it's an important topic this week. What does the Bridging Island Plan say about the new hospital?
Well, clearly the States Assembly took a decision to identify Overdale as its preferred site for the hospital, and so the Bridging Island Plan has a specific policy that deals with the proposal to site a hospital at Overdale, and obviously that's the application's being tested this week at the planning inquiry. So what the plan does is it identifies that site as the Assembly's preferred site for the provision of the new facility, but it sets out some key planning tests that the proposal has to meet. So, the island plan doesn't confer planning permission for the hospital. It sets a framework against which the proposal has to be considered, and that identifies all of the key issues that are being discussed this week, and obviously things like visual impact on heritage, transport, impact on residential amenity. All of those elements are set out in the policy framework that the plan provides for the hospital proposal.
Moving on to the process of the Bridging Island Plan, there were some concerns raised by both states members and the public about the consultation process and the fact that new sites were added onto a Plan B list last year. And take the example of Grouville, it moved from having one field earmarked for housing proposed by the minister to around a dozen, and then in the end, all fields were removed during the debate. That can't be right, can it? There's confusion and a lack of a clear direction.
I'm not sure there was a lack of a clear direction. I mean, clearly the plan came forward with a proposal to meet the island's housing needs, and it looked to do that in a variety of ways, and looking to allocate some greenfield sites was one of the policy responses that was put forward, particularly to meet the need for affordable homes. All of the sites that were put forward for affordable homes had been the subject of assessment as part of the Island Plan review process. We undertook something called a call for sites process in advance of the plan being prepared. All of the material that was in that call for sites process formed part of the evidence base for the plan, and that was published at the time that the draft plan was released. Clearly, a lot of the focus was on the sites that the minister was sponsoring or promoting at that time to meet the island's affordable housing need. But the consultation process was open to both, all islanders, including landowners, who would wish who wished the minister to look again at their sites and to look at the merits of their sites. Their representations were in the public domain. The independent planning inspectors who reviewed the draft plan and the consultation feedback to that reviewed all of those sites in a public session that was advertised, and additional comment was invited at that stage. So I think I think the point to make in relation to states member amendments, one of the interesting changes that we made to the process of the Bridging Island Plan this time around is that when states members brought their second amendments, or when they had an opportunity to lodge further amendments, they had to be related to issues that had been considered or raised previously, which is a different provision to that which sits under the normal Island Plan review process, where states members can bring amendments that need not be related to issues that have been considered previously. So I think that was a positive improvement to the process, and it meant that states members couldn't introduce entirely new sites. These were sites that had been the subject of assessment through the Island Plan review process and through the draft plan consultation. I think the Minister has been very clear. There's some issues that we can take away and learn from the process, and to look at lengthening things like periods of consultation. Clearly, we're working in quite a compressed timescale this time around, given the forthcoming end of the current government term. So I think there are always improvements that can be made around the information that's provided to the public, some of the mapping details, location of sites, those sorts of things, and the time that people have available to comment. So we will be working with the Minister to reflect on the process and look at what improvements can be made and hopefully incorporated into the subsequent Island Plan review process.
It's a good point. It's a good opportunity to look at review and, as you say, improve. This time we had over 100 amendments for just a 3-year plan. Surely there's a danger that the next 10-year plan will be unmanageable. Is that something that you will take account of, perhaps, to consolidate those amendments or to agree them before that perhaps it gets to that amendment stage?
I think it's right to highlight the fact that the number of amendments was unusual, and as you say, it did break the record for the number of amendments previously set by the last island plan, I think, which was about 58 amendments. This time we're at 103. But I think the important difference this time around is that because we adopted a different process for the review because of the timescales that we had to work within, we only produced one version of the plan. Whereas normally we produce two, and when we produce the initial draft, that then enables lots of issues to be identified and small matters to be dealt with in a revised island plan, and they're just dealt with through the process. And I think it was interesting to note that even though we did have 103 amendments, I think over 20 of those were taken as read at the start of the debate. A number of the amendments were sponsored by the Minister himself in terms of dealing with some of the issues that had arisen during the consultation. So I think when you boil it down, the key crunchy issues of the plan were those that were the subject of the greatest debate, and of themselves were not that numerous. Principally related to things like housing sites, some of the mineral sites, historic environment policies, things like that. So.
In his summing up, the Minister said that he wanted the issue of greenfields to be done. He really didn't want to build any more on greenfields. Do you see that perhaps the next time round, the next island plan, there won't be a call for greenfield sites and everything will be consolidated within existing development?
Well, I think we as a community will need to decide what the response to that should be. We undertook something called a strategic issues and options consultation in the preparation of the Bridging Island Plan, and I suspect we will do the same again. And that poses some of those key questions to islanders, such that if the island has a development need, how best can we meet that need? Where best can we make provision for that need? And how do we respond as an island community to those demands? So, and clearly we have, we're a small place, 9 by 5, and we have limited choices. And I think it's important that as a community we discuss what the options are and what the implications are, and the island plan will reflect what direction the community wants to go. I think, interestingly, this time around there was, a very clear message that greenfield sites are highly valued, both from their aesthetic point of view, but also their value to the agricultural industry. Inevitably that will be an issue that will need to be revisited. But there are other challenges around concentrating development in the existing built-up area. That leads to things like increased densities, taller buildings, can change the character of some parts of the island's built environments. So, there are choices to be made, and it's a real challenge.
You've already touched on the review process and where you look for improvements, where you implement changes. Do you envisage the public having a say on what the new island plan might look like?
Well, in terms of an island plan review process, if there's any change to the process of producing an island plan, that would require some form of legislative change, and that would undoubtedly be the subject of consultation. And I'm sure the Minister would want to work closely with the scrutiny panel and other states members in terms of looking to review any form of legislation that deals with the island plan review process. And clearly, in terms of the island plan review itself, in terms of the substantive content of the next island plan, there's a prescribed process for producing that. That will always involve statutory consultation. It will always involve independent examination and approval by the democratically elected assembly. So, it's a robust, open, transparent process, and I think we end up with a more robust plan as a consequence of that.
Thanks to Kevin Pilley for talking with me today, and thank you for listening to the Bailiwick Podcast. You can find the podcast on all the usual pod places, And don't forget to like and share. The music at the beginning and end of this podcast is I Shift My Weight by Luno. Tune in next week for more.